Welcome to another edition of the SprintCarUnlimited.com Deep Dive presented by EnTrust IT Solutions. Joining us on this week's show is the voice of the world of Outlaws, Johnny Gibson. Before we get to Johnny, don't forget to check out EnTrust IT Solutions. EnTrust is a full-service technology company serving small and mid-sized businesses in New York, Pennsylvania, and surrounding areas. The staff at EnTrust takes a personalized approach to technology. See why customers are choosing EnTrust IT Solutions as their technology partner by scheduling a free consultation at www.entrust-msp.com or calling 717-292-8868. Now here's Johnny. Johnny, welcome to the Deep Dive. It's a pleasure to have you on. I guess you're in Paducah, Kentucky, setting up for another Outlaw weekend.
Yeah, first time here since 2012. We did the Dirt Vision setup this afternoon. A lot has changed since the last time I was here. In fact, there's a third floor on the tower now that didn't exist the last time I was here. And so I have a little better view of the racetrack, but really looking forward to being back here tomorrow night.
Yeah, I don't see many towers in dirt track racing with 3 levels.
No, not very many of those at all.
No. So we'll start firing away here. I know you're busy. You know, you've had an interesting path to where you've gotten now. Obviously, it's been well documented. You've been a race fan all your life. You went with your father. You grew up in Western PA. I guess you went to what is now Latrobe Speedway, as
right.
that you can recollect. But you know, what was it about racing early on that kind of stuck with you or made it a passion for you?
I really don't know. I mean, I've always just really enjoyed it from the first time seeing late models and coupes at the time at what was called Schmucker Speedway, now Latrobe, to going to Pittsburgh's Pennsylvania Motor Speedway when they first opened. We did some traveling to late model shows mostly. We were more late model fans than sprint car fans. We'd see sprint cars maybe 2 or 3 times a year, usually when URC would make a Western PA run and stop at Bedford and Jennerstown. And then it wasn't until 1981 when I saw the World of Outlaws for the first time at Lernerville. And then that was it. No more late models. We were sprint car people. Saw the World of Outlaws at Lernerville on a Wednesday night, I believe, and then went to Williams Grove and Lincoln on Friday and Saturday that weekend. And from then on, it was traveling to see sprint cars.
So you actually chose sprint cars over late models. You're at Lernerville. I believe the race Steve Kinzer beat Doug Wolfgang at the race that you saw. What drew you to sprint cars? Like, what was it? Was it the overall speed? Did they just look cool? Because you're a kid still.
All of the above. I mean, it was the speed. It was the fact that everything just looked faster. The cars looked cooler. And at the time, so when I say I was a late model fan, that was back in the days of the wedge late models. Mm-hmm. And then they started to kind of get away from the wedge late models. And honestly, I love the way the wedge late models looked. I thought they were really cool. And then when they started to look a little bit more like regular cars, and the sprint cars were so exotic to me that it just kind of drew me in.
Yeah, because I read a lot about you. You were in the sprint car. You're in the Sprint Car Hall of Fame, which I'll talk about a little later. It's hard to believe you didn't end up doing late models as opposed to sprint cars.
I don't know about that. Once I was exposed to what I call good sprint cars, because at the time, Lernerville ran sprint cars weekly, but none of the other tracks around me really ran sprint cars on a weekly basis. And the guys that were racing at Lernerville at the time weren't necessarily, the cream of the crop. Again, watching the World of Outlaws come in and then going to Central Pennsylvania and experiencing the Outlaws versus Posse rivalry for the first time, it just pretty much blew my mind.
So schooling. You went to high school, obviously Western PA. Did you end up in college? Did you?
Yeah. California University of Pennsylvania.
What's your degree?
I have a creative writing degree.
You don't creative write.
In some ways I do, though. It's very similar. But no, so back to, going to college. So I went to college as basically a way to fund my passion for playing music, because at the time, my plan in life was to be a rock star. That's what I was going to do. So let me explain how I made money going to college. My dad was a mathematics professor at Cal U, so I got free tuition. I lived at home, so no room and board. But at that time, Pennsylvania residents that applied for a state schooling system university and had a minimum 1200 SAT score were offered at least a partial scholarship. It was Pennsylvania's way of trying to keep, I guess, what they assumed would be the better students in the state system. So Claude just knocked stuff off the table here.
It's not a show. It's not a show if Claude doesn't show up.
So I was actually offered a partial scholarship. So as long as I maintained a 3.5 grade average, I got $1,500 a semester to go to school, which back in the late 1980s, that was a decent sum of money for somebody who was living at home and had zero expenses.
So a musician. How did you
Yes.
end up getting into that? I know you play drums.
Yep.
How did you end up getting into to be a musician, and how did that all fit into this kind of making your way to where, the world of Outlaws? Because, and which we'll get to in a minute, it was 1996, 97, but
Right.
you were on your way to being a musician. Were you in a band at that time? And how did you just get into that?
Yeah. So starting in 1986, from 86 to 94, I played in bands in the Pittsburgh area, some better than others, some fairly successful on a local level, but nothing that really, took off. I was very briefly in a band that had a record deal, although I replaced the drummer that played on the record, so I actually didn't play on the record. But had a lot of fun, got to do a lot of really cool things, but made no money at it. And by the time I graduated from college, I was just working a series of pretty much meaningless day jobs, did a lot of telemarketing, stuff like that.
Yep.
Jobs that I could quit at a moment's notice if we got a call and said, hey, can you come play in Toledo, Ohio for $200 on a Tuesday night? Well, yeah, I won't make it to work the next day, but I can always find another job. So I did that. But still went to races. My dad and I still went to a lot of races. And again, as a Pennsylvania guy, an East Coast guy, reading area auto racing news and speedway scene and things like that, read Guy Smith's column, Kevin Eckert's columns, and I actually met Guy and Kevin at an ARDC midget race at Winber Speedway in Johnstown, Pennsylvania in 1986. And got to be friends with them, started seeing them at, more and more races. I got to be really good friends with Kevin, went to some races with him. He introduced me to Bill Woodside, who was selling programs for the World of Outlaws and also writing for Sprint Car, the Wayne Kindness publication back in the early 90s.
I remember it.
So still playing in bands, but still going to races as well and kind of juggling the meaningless day jobs. And in 1990, I went to the Knoxville Nationals for the first time and decided, hey, this is awesome. I want to go every year. I missed it in 91 and then went in 92 again. And then from that point, I'm still playing in bands in Pittsburgh, but I was just kind of tired of the Pittsburgh scene. I just needed a change of pace. And I had been going to Indy a lot because that's where Kevin lived. So I'd go on a weekend that the band wasn't playing. I'd go to Indy, would go to some races, hang out. And I just decided that I was going to move to Indianapolis and get into another band there, just continue the path of music, but in a different surrounding. And so I moved to Indy, moved in with Kevin, and that's when I started going to more and more World of Outlaws races because I'd help Bill Woodside sell programs. It was a way to go to the races, get in for free, and make a couple dollars on the side. So I'd be the guy walking through the grandstands with an armful of programs. Hey, get your program here. And so I got to know some of the World of Outlaws people that way. And I showed up to help Bill at I-96 Speedway the Monday after the King's Royal in 1995. And Bill wasn't there. So they asked me to sell the programs, do it all myself that night. And at that point, nobody had heard from Bill. We didn't know what was going on. So Ted Johnson asked me if I could come to Memphis Motorsports Park on Wednesday, Battleground Speedway Friday, and Devil's Bowl Saturday. They were doing kind of a Southern swing in July at that time, and said, hey, if Bill shows up, we'll take care of your expenses, give you some money. We just want to make sure we got somebody to sell programs. So I quit the meaningless day job I was working in Indy and went south with the World of Outlaws. And that Friday when we were at Battleground, Bill showed up at the World of Outlaws office in Plano, Texas, and turned in all the stuff and said he was done selling programs. So they asked me if I wanted the program gig full time, and I took it. And that's when things changed. It was no longer musician, it was working for the World of Outlaws.
Yeah, because then you get to 96 and you go to King Speedway.
Right.
And Bobby Gerald got you on the mic for an interview.
Right.
And you actually called a heat race.
Yes.
And what was that experience like? Because you've never announced.
No.
And
no.
Carlton Reimers, the story goes, was impressed. And the next year, you're the voice of the World of Outlaws. Was it just a natural thing for you? I mean, usually you're training or you work at a lower speedway, I'd say lower.
Yeah,
but
no, it came very naturally to me. And I don't know. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, like, being a musician, I sang some backup vocals, but I was very comfortable in front of a crowd. One way or another, it didn't bother me to kind of be the center of attention. And honestly, when you say, oh, by 97, you're the voice of the World of Outlaws, it really didn't happen that way. It took several years to really become the main announcer at all the tracks we went to. And it goes back to the reason I was hired in the first place, because Carlton was impressed that I was able to do it. But really the reason I was hired was to make sure that all of the sponsor reads, the PAs, the commercials, got handled at all of the racetracks. We go back to earlier in 96 when there was a company called Echo Water that was a sponsor of the Quick Time Award.
Yep.
We were at a racetrack. They brought a bunch of people, a bunch of their employees out. It was near their headquarters. And the announcer never mentioned Echo Water or welcome the people from the company or anything like that. And Echo Water dropped the sponsorship. So really, it all started just because the World of Outlaws needed somebody to make sure all their commercials got read. So a lot of that first year and even the first couple of years, there were a lot of nights where I didn't do any really announcing of the races. I just did the PA reads, took care of the script, and whoever was the announcer at the time at the track or was doing some of the World of Outlaws races called the action. It took me probably 2 or 3 years until I was doing, 90% of the race calls.
This was a lot like a guy starting out in a sprint car team and working their way to the Outlaws. You grinded it out. I mean, you were selling programs. You were on people's futons, couches, whatever. I mean,
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
This wasn't, I mean, you're in a very nice motorhome now and all that, but it sure as hell didn't start that way. And
no,
I mean, talk about those first 3 years. And were you ever at a point where you were like, man, I don't know if I made the right call here?
I don't know if I question whether I made the right call or not. I think I sometimes question, is this sustainable? Can I actually do this? I mean, we'll go back to when I first started. I made $1.50 for every program that got sold, and I got $100 a night for announcing. And I was responsible for all of my own expenses, my fuel, my hotels, my meals, everything like that. I mean, it was rough in the beginning. There were times when it was, I need to sell 10 more programs tonight to be able to put fuel in the van and eat tomorrow before the next race.
Shrewd. Ted was shrewd.
Yes.
So, I mean, your father, was he still, I mean, your parents.
Oh yeah.
Johnny, what are you doing?
Oh yeah. I got that. But actually to them, after the first couple of years, I think the World of Outlaws thing was at least a little more stable than the music had been before that. So in some ways it was a step up. And in some ways I was using some of the stuff I learned at school, at least like the creative process of it, and maybe writing some scripts for commercials and things like that. So I was putting my education to use a little bit more. And I think one of the things that helped was after the first few years when I started doing it a little more, and my dad started, hearing it from people that, hey, your son does a pretty good job, people saying things. And I think, he was kind of proud of that. And so that he was able to kind of console my mom a little bit, who was hoping her son was going to be, another college professor or a lawyer or something like that. That he was able to kind of, hold the peace there.
Boy, your mom, I mean, she probably was a wreck. I mean, the musician probably didn't thrill her that much, and now you're on the
No,
road selling programs. That's a
right.
double whammy for your mom.
Although I will say this, like the second year I was announcing, I finally cut my hair because I had long hair. I was,
Right.
90s rock star. So she was very happy about the fact that my job, kind of led to me getting a haircut.
Well, if that's one way to soothe her, that's I mean, you take what you can get. So you're kind of plodding along here and you get on the mic full time. How long
Yeah.
did it take you to get comfortable?
Um, I honestly, I don't know how to answer that because I always felt comfortable in my mind, but now looking back on it, like those first couple of years were probably really rough, but it didn't seem that way to me. And I want to kind of jump off for a second on something because it's kind of something you and I have talked about in the past, and I want to bring it up here. You know, I was so fortunate to start when I did in the days before live streaming and social
Social
media.
media. Yep.
Because basically the first few years when I was comfortable but was not very good at my job, you know, I had the time to grow into it. Nobody else heard me except for the people at the racetrack that night. And most of the time when the engines were running, they couldn't hear me anyway. So, and the fact that I was doing it for the World of Outlaws meant I was doing it, 70, 80, 90 times a year. So in 1 year, I got 5 seasons worth of local announcing experience
Yep.
in 1 year with the World of Outlaws.
Yeah, I mean, and that was going to be one of my questions because nowadays, it's ruthless. If you're
Oh,
not good,
absolutely.
if you're not what people want, and now trying to appease race fans is like trying to shoot pool with a rope. You can't,
Yeah.
you don't. I mean, everybody wants something different from a style standpoint. Has that changed over the years from then to now? Just kind of your voice, finding your voice. They say that with a writer. You got to find your voice and put it on paper, and you go through stages. I mean, I've done it. I still do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there are things that have changed even, because of the broadcast. When it first started doing the live audio, and then some races were on video, and then with it becoming every race on video, and then becoming much more of a professional production and kind of more of a TV broadcast kind of thing. And it's still evolving because there is still that line that I have to walk between being a broadcaster and conveying something that's going out on video, and also taking care of the fans in the stands and the people, though there probably aren't that many anymore, but there are still some that still click on the free live audio and just listen and are not seeing the video of the race. So there's that juggling act that goes on between all three of them. And I will say this, as much as I've tried to adapt to the TV broadcasts, my number one priority has always been, and in my mind will always be, the people in the grandstands at the racetrack. That's number one, because, and you've heard Brian Carter say this in interviews and so on, dirt vision is used as a way to drive people to the racetrack. It is a means to get people out and experience things in person.
We'll get to that in a minute with the different things with streaming and some of the complications there for you over the years. You're a big Pittsburgh sports guy.
Yes.
To a fault. I actually like I'm not a Penguins fan. I love hockey, but my team sucks. I'm a Chicago Blackhawks fan. So I think it's cool you announced the score of the Penguins games when you're in Pennsylvania. I just find that funny. But did you ever have aspirations of going into another type of announcing? Because here you're clipping along, you find your voice, you're getting more recognized, you're getting better at your craft. Did you ever have aspirations to maybe get into announcing something else?
No, no, not at all. As a matter of fact, years ago, there were some inquiries from people involved in NASCAR racing that, hey, would you be interested in, coming and doing this, doing some stuff on the PA at a NASCAR race, or maybe doing something, that might lead to a chance to do some MRN stuff or things like that. And just no interest whatsoever. Like, I am not, my aspirations were never to be a broadcaster in the first place. So I never had any dreams of going, to the next level, whatever that might be. I'm a sprint car guy. You've heard me say it a million times. I say it
Yep.
in every interview I ever do. I am the luckiest sprint car fan in the world. I get to see the world's greatest sprint car drivers and I get paid to talk about it. There's nothing else that I think would make me happy as far as, what I could do for a living. This is it. I found it.
And you're fortunate to do that. And
Oh,
I feel the same way now. Obviously it's different. I've written about a bunch of different sports, and I sometimes I miss those other sports, but sprint car racing is definitely something that's been a big part of my life. So when did you think you hit your stride where you're in the booth and you're like, everything's clicking? Uh, you have a really good grasp of what you're doing. You have the catchphrase everybody's heard for years. Was there a year, or can you remember a time where you maybe sat there and reflected for a minute and said, I got this?
not really, because I don't know that I have it yet, because it changes all the time. Again, there are added elements, like when I talked about setting up this afternoon at Paducah and getting the broadcast ready. If you would have told 1998 Johnny Gibson what he would be doing in the booth in 2024 with controlling the PA system and playing the music and fading the sounds in and out and queuing up pit reporters and tossing to commercial breaks and having 3 monitors and a tablet and all this stuff, I would have said there's no way I could do it. I think it's just happened so gradually. At first, it was just the live audio. Okay, you've got a little soundboard over here. You're going to have to kind of do some stuff with that. And well, there's video tonight, so we want you to have a monitor here to be able to talk about replays. And then, well, we're going to bring in a pit reporter. So, can you do that? And in the meantime, with all of this, I've evolved into a bit of a sound man too, because all of this has to go into the
Yep.
Trax PA system. So I'm the one that fits it all into the Trax PA system and figures out how to make that work as well.
It's funny. You didn't come up in the technology age. When
No.
you saw a cell phone, they were these big things in the
Yeah.
car. you know, I remember, my father and my ex-wife's father having those. But has that been the biggest adjustment? Just getting used to the technology, and when something new does come out, I mean, do you practice it?
You practice it a little bit. There have been times where I've set up things here in the motorhome, like, okay, this is the way I'm going to set up for a race this coming year, or things like that. But a lot of it, again, it's happened so gradually that it just kind of, it's become what I do. But and the technology has actually made me a better announcer. Again, back when I first started, we didn't have electronic timing and scoring. I had
Yes.
to try to figure out who was running first, second, or third. And if I went back to look for a battle for, position, if there were 2 cars side by side, I'd have to look out and count. Okay, this is a race for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a race for eighth. That sort of thing. Didn't have qualifying, right in front of me. They would read the times on the radio. I'd have an earpiece in my ear, and okay, first lap 11.623, and lap number 1 is 11.623. Yeah, but try to keep that in order and keep it okay. That was 7th quick on lap 1. Just had to figure out where it fit in the order. I mean, it's made things so much better for announcers, not just me, for every announcer.
So again, you're coming through the years, and it's the technology. You're getting a handle on that, and then we're throwing streaming at you. And you say you call the races for basically the people in the stands.
Right.
How much did streaming, though, tax you a little bit in the beginning when it first started? How did that kind of, maybe did it throw you off, and is it something you had to get used to?
Not as much in the beginning as actually more recently, because I do tend to look at the monitor a little bit more now, and I still glance out at the racetrack. But when it first started, I didn't even have a monitor in front of me, so I had no idea what was being shown on the screen. I just called what I was looking at on the racetrack, and I got very fortunate that we have some really really good shooters for Dirt Vision that see racing kind of the way I do. So Dean Mills is one of them. Chris Crone out at Knoxville. Steve Gigas in
Yep.
Western or in Central PA. We kind of see racing the same way. So a lot of times we were very much on the same page without me having any idea what he was shooting and what I was talking about were the same thing.
Do you, when you're even now, I mean, maybe when you were starting, was there ever a time where in the off season or uh, even, down weeks, hey, athletes practice, uh, as a person who has a job being an announcer, is there a time you ever practiced where you worked on your craft outside of just doing it on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday night?
In the beginning, especially the first couple of years, absolutely. As a matter of fact, go back to October of 1996 when Ted finally told me that you're going to be our announcer next year. He said, see Greg Stevens, get a bunch of videos, watch the videos, and call along with the races. That I did that a lot that off season before the first year, and I did it gradually less and less each year after that. But even today, I don't really do the practicing thing as much, but I will go back occasionally and watch a race or listen to it, and just to kind of make sure I'm comfortable with what I'm doing, because it's very easy to sound a little off and not really realize it, or to listen to it and say, oh, I'm saying this too much, or I'm saying that too much. Again, not as much as I used to, because I'm fairly comfortable in my skin right now and with what I do and how I do things. So and again, that has helped me tremendously in the minefield that is social media today. Whereas a younger announcer like Connor Wade, who is our pit reporter, kid's 20 years old. He's not even 21 yet. And he does fantastic. I'm amazed at his poise and his camera presence and his ability to communicate very well. And he's so well spoken. And I know the one thing that he does so much better than me. And I'm talking about camera presence. I never wanted to be a TV guy. I am so uncomfortable on camera. I will never be comfortable being on camera. I'm more of a radio guy than a TV guy. So, I've just, I've tried to work on that a little bit, but again, it's not what I do. It's difficult for me. So when I see him being able to be that comfortable on camera, I'm absolutely amazed. But getting back to the social media minefield, again, there's so much criticism out there, and I'm not saying it's all worthless, because it's not. You listen to the things that you need to listen to, but you also need to be able to filter out, what doesn't make sense. And going back to college, going back to my creative writing degree, I learned in a literary criticism class in college the difference between knowing whether something is good or bad and whether you like it or not, because they're not the same thing. You can like something that's bad, you can dislike something that's really good, and they're not the same thing. So when I see criticism of myself or other announcers, I kind of say, okay, well, you're saying I'm a bad announcer. I know I'm not a bad announcer. You don't like me. There's a difference there. There's, okay, that's a stylistic thing. You don't like, that I talk really fast or I get really excited. I get that. There's some people, it's not for everybody, but it's what I do. And I think if I were, not very good at it, I probably wouldn't have been doing it for 28 years now.
That's true. Do you ever get frustrated by stuff you read? I mean, maybe not now, but in the beginning stages of social media, when people are brazen now. Now I think it's even
Yeah,
worse. But
it's gotten so much worse. Yeah, I mean, you can't help but being affected by it in some way. But again, I'm so lucky that by that point, by the time social media became a thing, I was already pretty well set in what I was doing, and I knew, it a bad review on Twitter wasn't going to get me fired.
it's funny. I have guys I like, and I watch a lot. My job is to stand around and observe, and I always tell people, write what I see, and if I'm writing commentary, let the battle take place, and I come down off the mountain and sort out the bodies. So, but I watch you guys, the good ones. How I think people sometimes think that announcers just sit in a booth. You guys are actually in the pit area, notes, getting notes.
Oh yeah.
It has changed. I see Dave Hare in the pit area. He's in central Pennsylvania. I saw Bruce Ellis doing the same things. And how much is this more of a job than maybe what people think, where you
Well,
have to basically get everything?
the vast majority of what I consider to be the work part of my job doesn't take place in the booth at all. That's the fun part for me. That's when I'm kind of on stage. That's the show. But the hours that I put in sitting here in the motorhome looking up stats online, and okay, we're coming to central Pennsylvania. Freddie Raymer, how many wins does he have this year? Where are they at? Williams Grove, what's his best finish? Where's he at in the point standings? And taking notes on all of that and having those notes prepared in front of me when I go on that night, stuff like that.
You guys added the pit reporter thing. I thought,
Yes.
and I've interviewed Chase Robin. I feel that job, and you mentioned Connor Wade.
Yep.
I think that job's so tough because you never know when it's getting thrown to you. You don't really have a script. It's very difficult. Was it difficult for you at first to kind of work with another guy who's not in the booth? You can't see their reactions necessarily, which you can kind of feed off facial reactions and stuff, but you're throwing it to them, they're throwing it back to you. Was that a little difficult to get used to at first?
I think it all depends on the situation and who you're working with. I've been very fortunate with Chase and now with Connor to have two very good pit reporters. And I've worked with some very good guys in the booth, over the years as well. Tony Bachhoven and I think work really well together calling a race, kind of like a tag team call. And to be honest with you, I would prefer to have somebody with me in the booth every night. I mean, if it's somebody that you have that chemistry with, and it has to have that chemistry. It has to work. It's not something you can teach. It's not something that you can kind of work on. It's either there or it's not. Again, I'll use Bruce as an example, who I love. I think Bruce Ellis is an amazing guy. We got along so well. Like I'd show up 3 hours before the races and talk to him
Yep.
and get the local knowledge, and we had such great conversations, but our styles just didn't really mesh in the booth. And it's just, we got through it, we worked through it, but I could tell it just wasn't, and it's a little frustrating because I want it to work so badly because I really like him.
Yeah, Bruce is
Yeah,
great. I love
yeah,
talking to Bruce. It's just a wealth
yeah,
of knowledge.
yes.
You know, you work for the evil empire because that's what everybody considers the world of
Right,
outlaws.
right, right.
You're on the low rung of the evil empire, um, as far as maybe in the minds of people. Um, has it been difficult at times? I know you guys have went places and weren't received well by people up in the tower. They didn't like that you were bringing the equipment in. I'm not going to
Oh yeah.
name the names of the tracks. Is that difficult for you to kind of deal with that? You're just trying to do a job. You're trying to make the show, the best you can. And here you have people who are there weekly in the tower or in their press box, and they just make things difficult for you.
It happens occasionally. I will say it happens less now because I think everyone is aware now with Dirt Vision. Hey, this is what happens when the Outlaws come to town. They are going to do this. They're going to hook up all their stuff, and you basically work around them. It wasn't always that way, especially again in the early days when we just started doing live audio. It was, very different. Why are you trying to plug something into our PA system? Here's your microphone. Use this mic. Why do you have to mess with anything? So it's gotten a lot better over the course of the last 15 years of having tracks being welcoming, and I think part of it is the fact that, at least in my case, places are familiar enough with me that they kind of tend to trust me with their equipment.
So you've lived through a couple different things with the world of outlaws. I'm not going to put you too much on the spot because look, you're a guy, you avoid drama. That I know about you. You avoid it. Uh, You lived through the NST thing. Now you're living through the high limit thing. What's different between the two? Because you were there for the NST and now you're here for the high limit. You were a fan during the USA thing.
Right.
If you had to pick the biggest difference, or is there no difference in your mind?
Honestly, there really isn't. It's, it's been there, done that.
Okay, fair enough. So the other thing is, I want to ask you about some sprint car things.
Okay.
Your Mount Rushmore, all time, because I've done mine. So now I'm gonna ask you.
So you're saying 4?
Yeah, we're not gonna add another one or ties. I don't believe it. You make tough
Okay.
calls on Sprint Car Unlimited.com.
Okay. All right. I'll give you my 4, and then I'll give you my 5th and tell you why he didn't make the 4.
Okay, fair enough.
Steve Kinzer, Sammy Swindell, Mark Kinzer, and Donnie Schatz.
Wow. Who's fifth?
Doug Wolfgang.
Boy, we might throw down next time we see each other. I'm a Doug Wolfgang.
Here's why. Here's my explanation for that.
Go ahead.
The one thing that the other drivers have in common: multiple World of Outlaws championships. I know Doug didn't necessarily race for it, but at the same time, he had the luxury of being able to come in and win it or wear it. And if I finish 24th tonight, it doesn't hurt me down the road because I'm not chasing a championship.
Now, I'm going to try and change your mind because Doug Wolfgang's my guy.
Okay.
He wasn't a win it or wear it driver. It wasn't his style.
I agree. I will agree with that.
Plus, he had the 2 most successful years in sprint car history. And they were 4 years apart. 2 different teams.
Yep.
2 totally different crews. 2 totally different schedules. I can't ignore that the 2 most successful years in history were by that guy. And Steve Kinzer said he's the toughest guy he's ever raced against.
Again, I wish I didn't have to pick 4. I wish I. But in my mind, Mark Kinzer is the most underrated sprint car driver in history.
Yes. Now that I'll give you. I was a big Mark Kinzer guy through the 90s before I started writing. I thought he just needed to get. I mean, look, it was with his father. And if we're doing a Mount Rushmore crew chiefs, it's to me. Obviously it's Carl and then Ricky Warner. I think Carl's the slam dunk. Meaning, I don't think there's anybody. I have all the respect in the world for Ricky Warner. Carl was good. I think.
Oh, absolutely. But I think the thing that impresses me about Mark is when Mark started, when Mark actually at his peak, is when things started to get more equal, and having Carl wasn't the advantage that it was for Steve from 78 to the early 90s.
So now I'm going to put you on the spot again. There is the debate, small, Donnie Schatz, Steve Kinzer. Because you have Steve Kinzer, who, he was a bear. He could wrestle a car. He could take a car maybe that wasn't the best, and he could muscle it to the front. He was that guy. And I think intensity, I don't think there's ever been a more intense driver. I watched him smoke a cigarette in one drag at Williams Grove when he was put to the back. I believe 1990.
I was there that night. Yes.
Yeah, Williams Grove for the National Open. He passed Doug Wolfgang to win. Or Donnie Schatz, the age of parity. A very thinking man's driver, probably can pedal a car. Donnie will tell you he can feel an inch in his foot. Who do you got?
Donnie Schatz.
Wow. It's good. I can't disagree with you.
Here again, my reasoning on that. Steve Kinzer, no doubt, incredibly talented. Again, the intensity and everything. For a lot of his seasons where he would put together those amazing numbers, he also had the best car. Again, the age of parity,
Yep.
people say, oh, he could come from the back. Yeah, there were 3 or 4 guys that could come from the back because there were 3 or 4 really good cars.
And the racing was different back then.
Yeah, again, very much so. Absolutely. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Steve, because I think Steve is, right. I interviewed Steve one time at Eldora for a corporate thing, and I can't remember what the entity was at the time, but even Steve said at the time, there were a lot of nights out there that I had a car that weighed 200 pounds less than anybody else out there. And he acknowledged that what Donnie has done in this day and age. The other thing that I will give to Donnie is he is the cleanest sprint car driver I've ever seen. Yes. And I wonder, are we talking 50 extra wins or 100 if he were the type of guy that would, and not just in a feature, but in a heat race where if the difference in making the dash is crowding somebody or, giving them their space, and he gives them their space and starts 10th that night instead of in the top 8.
I think it's 100. I was actually, before you even said that thing, when you said about him being so clean, I'm going to say 100, because there's so many times he could have roughed people up that I've seen, good. Well, I'm old, but
we're not saying he could have driven dirty. He just could have done what 80% of the other drivers out there do.
How many slide jobs do you see him do? Not,
I will say this. He has a great memory, and when you do see the slide job from him, there's a reason.
Yeah, I've seen that side of Donnie. What do you think of what he's doing this year? You've seen the kind of the dip over the last few years. He's won 2 times already. Can he contend with David Gravel? Now Gravel's starting to stretch it a little. All right. He has this string of top 5s, average finish of I think 2 over the last 5 races.
Right.
Can he push David Gravel? Are we seeing a reinvigorated Donnie?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I think, he's gotten a package underneath him that he's more comfortable with. I don't want to say that he's 100% comfortable yet, but it's taken a long time to get to where they are now.
Best young driver that you see now. When I say that, teenagers, Pennsylvania, if you're 22, 23, you're considered young. I'm talking California teenagers.
Right.
You see Corey Day.
Yeah, absolutely. Corey is right there. No doubt. 100%. It's funny when you say young drivers, because, Buddy Kofoid's not very old at all, but he's considered almost a veteran now.
Well, it's funny. I did something the other day, and I'm always called, because when Buddy was coming out of California, I wrote about him when he was 14, 15.
You and I had a discussion,
Yes.
Buddy Kofoid, Gio Scelzi.
And I took Kofoid.
Yes.
And Gio's a different kind of driver out of California. He's not that on the edge guy, although he's more aggressive this year.
Yeah.
I do think he's more aggressive, but I've said the 5 best teenage drivers I've ever seen since 1984 are Stevie Smith Jr., not in any order. Stevie Smith Jr., Kyle Larson, Buddy Kofoid, Gio Scelzi, and Corey Day.
I could be talked into that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Those, and again, I think Ryan Timms had a lot of hype that first year. And then I think after the accident at Lincoln with us early last year, when he got hurt, and then but I think you're seeing a more return to that form that everybody was talking about before Lincoln this year. I've seen him do things this year that, he's kind of back on track.
We talk about the age thing, and the World of Outlaws are in a real good spot from an age standpoint. They have Gio Scelzi, Kofoid. Sheldon's not old. And,
no.
What do you see with this outlaw group? But you look at this current group of World of Outlaw drivers. I mean, Brad Sweet, who was, I think, 38, 39, he's over now with High Limit. But this group you have now, do you like what you see? Where do they stack up? And are the Outlaws in good shape moving forward? Just because, I mean, Donnie's the oldest, and then Bill Baylog, but then it really drops off as far as age.
I think they're in fantastic shape, and we may add another name to that list of five. The teenagers, Landon Crawley, when it's all said and done, might get there, and he's been by far the biggest surprise to me because
Yes.
I knew a little bit about him, but not a lot. And then when I saw he was going to be in the 7S, I was like, man, that's kind of a stretch. I don't know, a 16-year-old kid who's never really run 410s. But I mean, his finishes this year have not shown what he's shown me on the racetrack, but I think that will come. But I am so impressed by what he's done.
I think if he would have grew up in Pennsylvania or California, he'd be ahead because you learn to race there and then time trial. Like Brent
Yeah,
Marks, for instance. You know,
yeah,
always could pass cars, always could race, had to learn a time trial. Anthony Macri, people forget about him. He used to run testing tunes for a whole year before he even competed in central
right.
Pennsylvania. So I think Landon Crawley, and I agree, I think he looks really good, especially when he's time trialing. And let's face it, the
Yeah.
finishes will probably come. Where do you think he's at in that maturation process? I know you said he's been one of the surprises, but when do you expect him to maybe take that next step and start getting some better finishes?
I think toward the end of the season when he's seen some of these places two and maybe three times and comes back to it. And I think he's still figuring out the whole, you know, not make a mistake and then get flustered when you do, because that's the biggest thing. If you make a tiny little mistake at this level, you know it as well as I do.
Yep.
Everybody else pounces. And then it is so difficult to recover from that and say, okay, I'm going to get back by this guy. You tend to overdrive the car, and then one mistake leads to another and to another. And I think that's something that everybody at this level has to learn. And I don't think it matters how good you were on your local level. The World of Outlaws deal is just completely different.
No, I agree. Back to some of the announcing stuff.
Okay.
How long do you plan to do this?
Unless I hit the Powerball or Mega Millions, um, honestly, I see 10 or 15 years at least.
How old are you now?
56.
I don't think you'd stop even if you hit the Powerball.
Yeah, I would.
You love it, but there is a limit.
Okay, so I love it. I have the greatest job in the world. It is still a job. I mean, I don't want that to sound negatively, but I know I am required to be this place, this place, this place on this date, this date, and this date. I would still go to a ton of races, but I'd like to have the flexibility to do a little bit more. And like I would love to go to Europe for like 6 weeks, but my job doesn't allow me to do that. I'd love to see a little bit more of the
Okay.
world, but again, I'm certainly willing to give that up for what I do now, unless I had the means to be able to do both.
Yeah, I know, Jerry Regal, the late Jerry Regal is a
Yeah, yeah,
great friend of mine. You know, we used to talk about conversations he had with you, and you do like to see different things, seeker of knowledge type things. I know you're into a bunch of different things, and so that doesn't surprise me. When they told you to introduce music to this whole thing, you take that seriously.
yeah. And I don't know if they told me to introduce music. I'm the one that kind of had to push to be able to bring it in. But absolutely. And you know what? I know 90% of the people don't pay attention to it or don't get what I try to sneak in at times or the way I do it. But there are a few that do, and I hear from them regularly. So that's what kind of keeps me going. But yeah, absolutely. I put a lot of thought into the music that I'm going to use on a particular night or for a particular reason. That just, like the other night, Arrowhead, we had never raced there before. First song for the first heat race. It feels like the first time. Just stuff like
Yep.
that. Just And again, I take a lot of pride in it. Sean Neistat, who back to announcers is one of my great friends, and another guy who I love being in the booth with and going back and forth with. You know, he's that way as well. So we message each other during the races, like, I heard that song. I see what you're doing there. Just
I like your select. I like some of your selections. So, because I like stuff a little heavier. I'm a big Disturbed guy.
okay.
Not that I am Disturbed. It's the band Disturbed, and of course Draymond when he went off into Device.
Yeah.
But you mentioned other announcers. Do you listen to other announcers, and do you have some favorites or guys who you think who are very underrated?
I listen to them and more. I don't know if I critique them as much as I just like, okay, I, I dig this. I dig the way he's doing this. Maybe I wish I heard this a little bit more, but a lot of them I listen to more in terms of could we work together down the road? Because honestly, my preference would be for there to be 3 people in the booth and a pit reporter. If we had the funds to do that, and back to some of the social media stuff. One of the things that makes me laugh when you say that, do you read those comments and does it hurt you that I've seen, Johnny Gibson didn't have this ego, so and so could work, and honestly, I prefer to work with another announcer. It is so much better to have another set of eyes on the racetrack and somebody that you can bounce ideas off of back and forth. That's the hardest thing about my job. The absolute most difficult thing is filling downtime being the only person in the booth.
It's funny you say that. I was thinking of that today. Ryan Hand, my podcast co-host, has been tied up all week. We haven't been able to get a podcast out yet. And one of the reasons I don't do one by myself very often, people want to hear a different voice.
Yeah.
And I think multiple people in the booth, it
Yeah.
shakes things up. You can play off each other.
Yep. Yeah. Again, my ideal situation would be me and let's say, Sean Neistat, Tony Bachhoven. There are, multiple guys you can name, but again, that chemistry, you have to have that chemistry to be able to go back and forth. But 2 guys doing play by play, and then, Dominic Selzy there is the color guy.
Good old Dom. You're in the Sprint Car Hall of Fame. That's quite an honor. I'm sure you never expected something like that when you started. But you're in the Sprint Car Hall of Fame. What was that whole experience, like for you, finding out, and then till you actually got inducted?
I found out about 3 weeks before the actual announcement came out. So I called my dad and told my dad, and my girlfriend Melody was with me when I got the call, so she knew. But not being able to tell anybody else about it until the announcement came out, because I was just so overwhelmed. I'm still overwhelmed. We're coming up on 2 years later, and it's just, I can't believe that, I'd be in the Hall of Fame. Like, why would you want to put me in the Hall of Fame? There are so many deserving people, and I'm just, I don't know how to describe it other than overwhelmed. I mean, I'm very humbled. I never ever would have thought, I think the best I could have ever hoped for was like maybe someday after I've retired or when I'm gone, posthumous induction, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
never dreamed that while I was still doing this, it could even be a possibility.
Well, Johnny, it was well deserved. And, I want to appreciate you coming on the show. It was good stuff. It's always good to catch up with you. Chicago still has the best goaltender if you're ever comparing them against Penguin goaltenders, Eddie Belfour.
I want to leave you with something here, because I know you're kind of about styles and things like that. You've asked me some stuff, so I've put together like my list of I don't think I've tried to sound like somebody per se, but I've got my list of like 5 or 6 guys that I want to take something from each of them and combine them, and that's Johnny Gibson. That's what you hear when you hear me. So Doc Emmerich, who I think is the greatest sports announcer in history, an NHL guy that recently retired. So I've got Doc Emmerich for his knowledge of the sport, his passion for the game. Mike Lang, who did the Penguins radio broadcast forever, and who I actually knew as a friend before I ever became an announcer. Because Mike was way into blues music, and I would go and sit in with the blues jam every Monday night at Gene's Bar in Pittsburgh. And if Mike wasn't on the road or calling a game, he was at Gene's on Monday nights. So I got to know him through music. And one of the coolest things ever was, 15 years later, being back home in Pittsburgh for Christmas, going out to see some of those guys and running into Mike Lang and telling him what I did and became an announcer and having him say he was proud of me. That was, really cool. But so Doc Emmerich and Mike Lang from the hockey side of things. Jim Ross from the world of wrestling, just because that, I read Mick Foley's book, and I'm not much of a wrestling fan now. I was when I was younger, and I kind of got away from it, but I still, kind of like the books and things like that.
Yep.
And what really struck me about Mick Foley saying that he can't imagine his matches being called by anybody else. So for that reason, that's the Jim Ross side of it. Like, I want, it's nice to think that for some people, when they think of sprint car racing, they think of me. So that's, yeah, and being able to make the big moments big. So it's that. I take that from Jim Ross. And Howard Cosell.
Oh, he's fantastic.
I loved Howard Cosell, and I've gone back and watched a lot of stuff because when he was doing most of his stuff, I was still fairly young. The thing that I love about Howard Cosell is he never dumbed things down. He said it the way he was going to say it, and he appreciated the intelligence of his listeners or his viewers to figure it out. So I don't want to ever be accused of dumbing things down for an audience, because there's this stereotype about race fans, and they, people go to a dirt track on a Saturday night. And, I found that to be, there are occasions when that's true, but a lot of times you really get surprised by the intelligence of people that you're around. And so I don't want to be thought of as somebody who ever dumbed anything down for my audience.
Well, no, and I gotta leave you with one thing, just for the Pittsburgh fans.
Yep.
Does Russell Wilson help you this year? Are you pleased that they brought in Russell Wilson?
Yes,
are you feeling
absolutely.
good about your Steelers this year?
I am feeling really good about my Steelers, but of course, I felt good
go.
about Kenny Pickett last year.
Okay,
so
it's not what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah, I think the quarterback room is much improved this year. I think Wilson is the starter. I think Fields may be the guy of the future. I think, but what I like about what we've got now is you've got two fairly similar guys in there at least. So if you're switching from one to another, it's not going to be, we have to change the playbook completely for this guy to come in. But I like it, and I'm actually really excited. The talk lately has been the Steelers are in hot pursuit of Ayuk as a receiver. So I'm,
if they get Ayuk, I'll feel better about it. I like Russ. Look, it's better than last year. Not a Justin Fields guy. I like bringing in, was it Arthur Smith?
Yep.
I'm still a Tomlin guy. I know you're not. That's where I thought you were going to go. I think he's better than what you think he is. So, but again, Johnny, I want to thank you for being on the show. I appreciate it. And I look forward to, I'll be seeing you in about 3 weeks, I guess, give or take.
Yep, absolutely. Can't wait to get to Central PA. And that rivalry, there's something special about the Posse versus the Outlaws. Having done this for 28 years, I get excited every night, but there are certain places that you really get amped up for, and Central Pennsylvania is definitely one of them.
That's true. It's like Dallas and the Redskins.
Yep.
Or the Steelers and Ravens for you. So again, Johnny, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Anytime. That's going to wrap up this edition of the SprintCarUnlimited.com Deep Dive presented by EnTrust IT Solutions. Thank you to Johnny Gibson for being on the show. We had a lot of good stuff there. And also, don't forget to click the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, and also check out our daily exclusive content at www.sprintcarunlimited.com. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Deep Dive.